We certainly don't intend to use it, but it's typical of the kind of third and fourth order things that we work. On the loads, we are in a much better posture than we were for STS-26 and 27 this time on being able to use all the capability of the shuttle that we can to avoid scrubbing a launch. Basically what we have done is that in addition to the nominal ascent profile, we have developed and certified through the ground computers 4 additional profiles, that is different schedules of angle of attack and versus time of the trajectory. So we really have about 5 choices, the nominal plus these 4 what are called I-loads. And the several hours before launch, at the time we get the best balloon data, we're able to pick any one of those 5. The crew is trained on them. As a matter of fact, to the crew, they really make very little difference because they can't really see a lot of the difference. And they're just minor adjustments of angle of attack at different Mach numbers and different altitudes. And of course, in the basic shuttle system, we have what is called, I believe, a loads relief program, so that even after you're airborne, the vehicle actually doesn't just blindly steer its way through a line in the sky, but as it sees shears and so forth, it adjusts for them. So this gives us a good bit more flexibility than we've seen before. Nevertheless, the weather is the weather. What's been going on the last couple of days is the winds have been drifting back towards what are the normal February and March winds, and that gives us a better situation. But you still do see on every balloon some wind shears that could either be downrange, in other words, in angle of attack, or cross range, which would be angle of side slip. And so you have to run the winds profile through a loads profile and to first pick the I-load set that's best for you. And even then, sometimes you get to where the weather isn't cooperating and you violate a parameter, and then the engineering people have to go in and see if they believe it or not. And if we get to that situation tomorrow and we believe it's a real violation, we're not going to fly. But frankly, I think we've got a good bit of flexibility, and so I certainly hope that we do, and I don't see that the forecast could be much better for us.
Dan?
Dan Billow at WESH-TV. Bob Sieck, with the late delay caused by the master events controller problem and working through the weekend like this, how many hours has the launch team and the crew at the launch pad been putting in? Are there any concerns? Has it slowed you down at all in terms of people getting fatigued or working up to the limit of hours that they can work? And also, did you change the time of RSS rollback?
We'll answer the last question first. Yes, we're going to move it in a little bit earlier. The crew that does that job normally reports to work at 3:30 this afternoon, and rather than have them wait for the 6 o'clock call to stations to pick up the clock, we're just going to put them to work as soon as they get there because there's no constraints to that activity. On the overtime situation, obviously we stay on top of that and watch it closely. The overtime in the last few weeks has really decreased for the overall workforce. And in spite of the fact that we had the master events controller problem and that the weather was not good to us earlier in the week, we've been able to react to those kind of changes in a more orderly fashion, and it gets back to the question from over here. It seems to be going smooth. That's because the rest of the standard work that we do on an every time basis is going per the plan. And it says that the plan's good, the procedures are sound, and the people are familiar with the work that they have to do. And that's really happiness to us that are on the side of having the responsibility to do the ground processing. We're going to stay on top of the overtime. Any exceptions to the policies are still going to go through a management approval cycle. But again, the number of exceptions we've had to grant, even in spite of the hardware change-out and weather, have been below average. And I think that's a good sign, and it's an indicator if the hardware and the weather are going to be good to us in the future, even if they're not, we still have a good shot at meeting our manifest and our schedules.
Susan?
Susan Cole, WCPX-TV Orlando. With STS-26, we saw the astronauts having a lot of fun with the wake-up calls and the Hawaiian shirts and the fishbowl. I've been told by several sources that we may not be seeing that same kind of atmosphere on STS-29. The emphasis is going to be more on professionalism and the jobs they're doing. Could you comment on that?
Well, I thought the STS-26 operation was pretty professional. And no, I'm just like you. For each of these flights, you just have to wait and see how the crew on orbit does their business. But it's a fun-loving bunch, and I'm sure they'll have a great time. And we certainly have not. I certainly have sent no signals to them that I want them to act one way or another. They're trained, ready to fly, and I hope they do have some spare time. Looking out the window and enjoying space flight is something that they deserve after all this hard work.
Chet?
Chet Leonard with Gannett Newspapers. Admiral, truly expanding a little bit, if you would, on what Bob Sieck was talking about. The flow is going so well. What, from your perspective, has been the big change or improvement in the system? Can you narrow it down or give an example of why it's going so much better?
Well, I think the entire shuttle recovery has delivered a system that is very organized. It's the management chain of command is one that's very straightforward. Everybody knows who they work for and who works for them. We have spent a lot of time on the underlying part of the program, which is training and paperwork. But when you come to a specific flow, I'd have to say you got to have a little bit of luck. We are dealing with a very complicated system, a lot of avionics, a lot of different black boxes, a lot of things that could act up, and so the combination, I think, on this flow of beautiful weather and a little bit of luck and a lot of great people out there on the floor that have and out on the pad and at various parts of the system have come together for a good flow. But we're going to stay on top of it. It could, we could have a hardware failure in chat tonight or early in the morning, and we'll deal with it. But I think it's a very organized program, and the recovery is going extremely well. It's going to be a great year, but within a week, I think, after this flight, the vehicle that's going to launch Magellan is going to be right back out there on the pad, start its checkout. And we've still got some margin in our hip pocket between tomorrow morning and the Magellan flight to handle problems if they come out. So I'm very proud of the team and glad of what I see, but it takes a little bit of luck because it's still a risky business and a complicated system. But at least this far in this count, it's come together the way we'd like to see them all.
Mort Dean?
Mort Dean, ABC News for Admiral Truly. Dick, going back to Bermuda versus the bailout, were you suggesting that the idea of the bailout, if needed, has been discarded in favor of Bermuda?
Oh, no. It's just that if we got in a situation so bad that we had lost multiple engines and the only way to save the crew would be to do the bailout, we would certainly do that, and our rescue forces would get them back, but we'd lose the orbiter. Naturally, if we have any chance at all, well, I shouldn't say any chance at all. If we have any situation at all that is where the crews are confident enough that they could put the vehicle on the runway, then we'd be faced naturally with trying to find out with what happened that put us there, and we'd have to go get cranes and so forth, get the orbiter back. But the nation would not only get the crew back, but also get the orbiter back, and of course that's of immense value to us. But the bailout system is still available to the crew for the same kinds of emergencies that they had or might have to face for the previous couple of flights.
Jay Barbary?
Jay Barbary with NBC. I have two questions. Bob, I understand the countdown's going to get underway about 5:47. Could you take us through what's going to happen tonight in the final countdown, and also how many days do you need before you can roll Atlantis to the pad after you're launched? And for Dick Truly, with the cannibalization of Columbia, do you really think you're going to be able to get that back in the fleet this year?
The countdown activity, as Jay indicated, it picks up at 5:47 this evening with really the preparation of the pad for the cryogenic loading. Normally at that time we would retract the service structure. As I indicated before, though, those crews will be in a few hours earlier than that, so since we have no constraints to that, we'll move the service structure prior to that time. And that gets us down to 10:47. We have a 1 hour built-in hold there in the event that the clearing the pad activity underwent some kind of delay. That's a period of time to catch up so that we could start our propellant tanking at 11:47, and that's a 3 hour job nominally, which puts us finishing that at roughly 2:47 in the morning, and then we have a 2 hour built-in hold. And that's to take care of the eventuality if something does come up in the cryogenic loading, particularly if it would require us to put people into the launch pad to repair something. It gives us the opportunity to do that and still have a tanked vehicle by 4:47. At 4:47, we should have the crew module prepared, and at that point in time, we're really looking and waiting for the crew. And they should get there shortly after 5 a.m. We've got a couple of the standard built-in holds at minus 20 minutes. That's 10-minute hold, and at minus 9 minutes, the 10-minute hold. And there have been no changes to those procedures or those built-in holds. In terms of getting this vehicle off the pad, once it clears, we send the safing teams out there and make sure that there's no hazards as a result of the launch environment. And then we start a cleanup, a wash down, and the real attention is going to be on the payload changeout room. We want to prepare that for the Magellan spacecraft, and that takes approximately 5 days. If it's really very clean when we look at it, we might get it done a day or so early than that, but we want to make sure it's thoroughly clean. We're going to do the best we can, obviously. So that's nominally 5 days, and then the Magellan will come out and spend 5 days of processing to get it ready for the shuttle. So approximately 10 days after launch, we should be ready to roll Atlantis out of there and proceed on with that pad flow.
The other question had to do with Columbia flying this year and also about cannibalization. I'd like to, if I could, comment to both of those as somewhat different issues, if I might. First of all, in preparing for a congressional hearing last week or the week before, I reviewed the record on logistics and what is called cannibalization, which means anytime you run a fleet of vehicles, whether they're airplanes or spacecraft or trucks, sooner or later in real life you get to the point where there's some part that you need that is not available in the bins but is on another vehicle, so you go get it, and that event is called cannibalization. In reviewing the records, the money that we have applied to the logistics program has paid off. I believe I don't remember the specific numbers, but if you look at the cannibalization record of the average of the 5 or 6 flights prior to the Challenger accident compared to our last 3 flights, it's an improvement of like 20 to 1. It's a huge improvement. Although we did run into a situation the other day when we changed the master events controller, we did end up taking one that had already been checked out off of Columbia. The situation with Columbia is not driven by this, and as a matter of fact, it's not being driven by any particular part of the workload, but there is a tremendous amount of work to get it airborne for its July flight. You asked, would it get airborne this year? I'm certain that it will. If you ask if it's going to get airborne in the July flight, I would say that that's much, the schedule is much tighter. What we plan to do, however, since we have certainly not given up with at all, and I think the people that would tell you that the most are the people over there working on Columbia, what we plan to do is fly this flight, see what this bird looks like when she comes home. At that time, take a look at Columbia and how she's doing, and decide whether or not we want to keep on our manifest the way it is, or whether we would have to adjust the manifest, because our highest priority here in NASA is to protect the planetary windows, and there is one Columbia flight and one Atlantis flight, I think, both DoD flights in between Magellan and Galileo. So it is going to be something we'll be addressing, but right now the bottom line is we certainly haven't given up on that particular flight, and even if we readjust the schedule, I anticipate that Columbia will fly this year.
Gentleman in blue shirt.
Alan Silverman from Voice of America. This is a combination of communications and safety questions, so I'm not sure whether to address it to Admiral Truly or to Mr. Allen, so I'll address it to both of you. About a week ago, there was a major solar flare reported, and it was said that it could have an impact, a serious impact, on satellite communications as well as communications here on Earth. Has that entered into any of the planning, and also do we have experience with flying the shuttle in a magnetic storm or the type of interference that can be caused by a solar flare?
Well, solar flares do have cause some problems normally on normal communication satellites, the international satellites and the domestic satellites. It is not a factor at all in the scheduling of this mission. It is a factor, however, in the TDRS in orbit. We have, with solar flares, sometimes what we call heavy particle hits in orbit increase. We average about 2 of these a day. With the bird that's been up there since April, and the bird that we launched in September, and all future vehicles, we've modified the design to correct for that problem. That was a surprise to us back in '83. With the solar flare activity, that would go up. However, that doesn't really affect our communication with that satellite. However, there is some effect in the normal communication of the DOMSAT series. And with shuttle, I don't see that's not a problem at all.
Howard Benedict.
Yeah, Howard Benedict, AP, for Dick Truly. Dick, this is your third post-Challenger flight and the second for Discovery. How would you assess the overall importance of this flight to the entire recovery effort from Challenger?
Oh, I think this flight is absolutely vital. You know, after the Challenger accident, we went through really not just a NASA, but a national and international manifest relook. And because of the payload backlogs that we were seeing, we picked the most important satellites to be first. And one of the things, as a matter of fact, the first item on our list was to get the tracking data and relay satellite constellation into as good a shape as we could so that we could build on that in future flights. So the very fact that the first flight was a tracking data relay satellite, second was a DoD, the third was the second tracking data and relay satellite, in itself attests to the importance that we place on this particular mission. I think the only thing that would have bumped this flight is if we, for whatever reason, had to pull it in order to get Magellan off in its window, because it has, with all things considered, it probably would have taken a higher priority, but because of the good work in the program and the things that we've done, we didn't have to face that, so we want to get this one out of the way, and we've got, frankly, quite a bit of margin on Magellan now, because we have several days before we would have to even bump the first day of its window, and then it's about a 30-day window. So we're in good shape, but we need to get this one off.
And just one more follow-up from Mr. Aller to assess the importance of getting this TDRS up there.
Well, as Dick has said a couple times, this will complete the constellation we plan to operate with TDRS till about 1994, where we're going to have 4 of these vehicles on orbit. You may recall that the first vehicle that we launched in '83 has been up there a long time. It's had a lot of problems getting to orbit, you may recall, and has had some communication equipment failures on board. This vehicle that we plan to launch tomorrow will replace that in its location over the Atlantic Ocean, and we will drift TDRS-1 into the spare location. The importance is that this vehicle, with the one we launched in September, will give us 2 fully operational satellites that provide the coverage that we're going to need for the next 5 or 6 years. And that the importance of TDRS is, of course, that all of NASA's Earth orbiting satellites in the future will be operating through TDRS. The Galileo mission, of course, and the Magellan mission will be using our DSN primarily for the Deep Space Network. But when we get to Space Telescope in December, GROW next year, URs, all the future COBEs, all the future missions that are being low Earth orbit are dependent upon the TDRS. So we need as much capability since we'll be closing our ground sites. One time, you may recall, we had 33 ground sites around the world. We're going to be closing 4 more this year, and that will leave only Mila and Bermuda and the Australian site, the Goldstone site, and the Spanish site. So we have a minimum coverage on the ground, and we're depending very heavily on the robustness of this system in orbit. When we put we decided years ago that we're going to put our tracking capability in orbit to give us more coverage of the Earth, then we want to make sure that we have a system that we can depend on. So that is a very significant flight that we have tomorrow.
Ross Cabot from WSTV. This is for Bob. The Atlantis is rather unique because it has a specific launch window. How much pressure did that put on getting Discovery up? Did you have any harder to prepare it?
Not really. When the real key to meeting the schedules, other than hardware and weather being good to us when we're at the pad, is getting the vehicles processed through the orbiter processing facility. This was the first turnaround from Atlantis' first mission, and other than the tile debris damage, it was a clean mission. So we were able to maintain what I would call an orderly process through the processing facility, and the only thing that we're looking at with the processing of that vehicle through the rest of the flow is the change out of the oxidizer pumps for the main engines, and we're going to split that job between the VAB and the launch pad. But it didn't change the game plan, as it were, to get the vehicle cleanly through the OPF, and it went better than Discovery, and we would look forward to the next turnaround that it would be even shorter, and in fact that we need to do in order to meet the manifest and schedules down the road.
Vic Ratner.
Vic Ratner, ABC for Admiral Truly. There are smart computer systems in mission control that are doing the work that people used to do. How do the crews feel about relying on those machines instead of on the judgment of people? And if the systems work out, when do we get to the point where it only takes 6 controllers or something to run a flight?
Well, we are investing some money in some upgrades to mission control calculations, but we never take judgment out of the system. All of those systems, even the most sophisticated that we're working on, simply help the human being that's looking at the screen. I think it's going to be a long time before we ever get down to 6 people in the control center in a system as complicated as Shuttle is, or even a system after that. But I would like to, if we could, I would love to see a situation where we really could maximize the help that we're giving the human beings and take the human beings out of the loop. As far as the part of the question about how does the crew feel about it, once the systems have been certified, trained to, simulated, tried out before we commit to them and go through the entire rigor of the process, I would think they'd feel just as good about a newer system as the one we have. So I feel good about what we're investing in, but we're not going to take judgment out of the loop ever, I don't believe.
Mark Kramer.
I guess this is for Admiral Truly. To follow up on the issue of the solar activity, I know Mr. Aller's answer went mostly to communications and TDRS, but there were very heavy X-rays released by some of the early activity a couple of weeks ago, and presumably that may reoccur. Has there been any discussion about the medical impact of X-ray exposure to the crew? Has there been any contact with the Soviets about how the Mir cosmonauts went through that?
Our medical people are tracking the flares. Normally, the most danger from radiation to humans in orbit are when the orbits are at higher and higher inclinations, particularly polar orbits. And the Soviets, of course, have the Mir spacecraft in an orbit that's much higher inclination than this particular flight, which is at 28.5 degrees inclination. The answer, however, though, is no. I have not been in any specific meetings in the last couple of weeks where our medical people expressed any concern about this flight, and also no, I've not been in any personal contact with the Soviets about any concerns that they would have for their Mir crew that's aboard their mission today, and so I just don't know.
I think, though, when we're flying Skylab, we were very excited to have solar flares while we were in orbit, and got some very good data during that mission. I think as long as the crew is properly protected, and they are in these vehicles, there's no problems. As a matter of fact, when we have the right instruments, that's where we want them to be.
We're starting to run into a sun and time problem. We'll be taking 2 more questions. Dick Lewis?
Dick Lewis for the Chicago Sun-Times. I wanted to ask Admiral Truly for an update on the turbo pump defect problem and whether or not that has been established as a manufacturing problem that can be handled.
The update is that we have resolved that problem. It was not a manufacturing problem. It was a problem in the assembly process that we put the pumps through, in which, due to a number of detailed technical reasons, we allowed some moisture to get into a pump, and it's a part that had very high stress on it, and a very microscopic contaminant particle resulted in the final analysis in a small crack in a part. We have resolved the problem, however, by pulling all those pumps that had gone through that process out of the system. We have reassembled. We have been able to reuse some of the hardware, but we have disassembled and reassembled the pumps that we now have. We have changed the process to make sure the drying process does not allow moisture to remain in the pump, doing various different things out at the Rocketdyne plant where they're put together. And then we've taken the new pumps down to Stennis and run them each on a test stand so that they are just as certified as they were before. So I think that problem is behind us. We are flying new pumps, newly assembled on this mission, and we will fly similar pumps that have been through a similar process on each of the upcoming missions.
Yes, Mitchell Krause, CBS News. What can you tell us about the rats? Are they loaded on board, and what about the other scientific experiments? Is that being put on board this afternoon, as we had heard earlier?
I'm not sure what the schedule is, and I had the privilege of flying with several rats on STS-8. They make great partners. They make great partners. I did enjoy the other 4 guys who were on the mission more, but they seem to have had a lot of fun. But seriously, that's a student experiment. I'm not terribly familiar with it. It's been through all of our, processes of preparing it to flight. I'm not sure when it's going to go in the vehicle, but I can say that I've been assured through the briefings that I've had that not only the tracking data and relay satellite, but all of the secondary experiments on this flight are ready to go.
One final question up here, the gentleman in the brown shirt.
Russell Hannigan, Gazette Newspapers in England. This is your 3rd attempt at launching a shuttle since renewed shuttle operations. How does the panel feel about the new shuttle processing procedures which you have to go through? And are we going to make the schedule for the rest of the year and the following years?
Well, I'd rather Bob Sieck, since he is closer to how KSC feels about the processing, I think he could come in better. And as to whether we make all of our schedules in this year and following years, I'm afraid we'll just have to tune in later and look back and see. But I will say this, that the shuttle program is back into flight. We have put into it a discipline we intend to keep into it. We have been on the same manifest on essentially the same dates for all of the shuttle flights now for over a year. If you look back to March of last year, 1988, we were projecting to fly STS-26 in the late summer, early fall. We did it. We were projecting to fly STS-27 in the fall. We did it. We were projecting to fly TDRS in the February time frame. Here we are early in March. We've still got margin, and so on. So you have to take them one at a time. Sooner or later, we'll stumble and miss a flight or have to make an adjustment, but that's space bids. It's never going to be perfect, but I think if we keep the discipline in the system, we're going to see a great success. Bob, would you comment briefly on the processing thing?
Sure. Well, the procedures which were developed as a result of the new rules and the new policies that changed after Challenger are still going through what I would call an evolutionary process. We've had only one turnaround now with a vehicle that's out of the pad, and of course the second one, Atlantis, we just finished. And each time we go through that with the newly developed set of procedures, we learn more ways to implement those requirements more efficiently. And I don't know how much further down the road that's going to take us, but I think it's still going to be probably another turnaround of each vehicle before we have what I would consider to be a standardized set of procedures. But we are seeing the effects of the learning curve, the familiarity of the team with the procedures and the hardware, and it's a good effect because the time is decreasing. Overall, though, we should make the point we have added more work content to the turnaround of each vehicle, and we're just going to have to deal with that and do it as efficiently as we can. And I think the signs are there that we are.
Let me add one. There's another team that's involved down here that perhaps you all don't hear too much about, and that's the payload team at KSC under John Conway. That team is the team that we deal with and all the payloads deal with. And as I said earlier, I've been through this 5 times now, and I see not only a great improvement in Dick's operation on the shuttle and in the work here that Bob and the team do at KSC, but also in the handling and the processing as we flow through the payload side of the operation. And there has been a significant improvement in that.
Just one final planning note. We will be having the post-launch conference here tomorrow morning, 1 hour after liftoff. That concludes this news conference, and thank you all for coming.